Hello and welcome to We Debates. I am Joe Munene. Now, almost 60 years since independence, Kenya's democratic project has trudged on with a bag of mixed results. In 2010, the country rebooted its constitutional framework, came up with a new constitution and a devolved system of government. 12 years on, whereas there has been appreciable progress in many areas, significant challenges have remained, especially on the leadership front. So much so that there have been contestations as to whether the will of the people is actually reflected through the leaders that we have. Do we have the political leaders we deserve? And if not, who's to blame? And where does this democratic project of ours become unhinged? Is the blame with the politicians themselves, or the electoral, political, governance and political party structure systems? Or is the blame with the electorate themselves, who are only too eager to vote in as leaders, people with a high likelihood for non-performance and corruption? Do we truly have the political leaders we deserve? This is Good for Debate.
The debate motion tonight. Let it be resolved. We have the political leaders we deserve.
We do deserve the leaders that we have, because we elect them. We go to the polling stations and vote for them. They don't come from other countries, they don't come from heaven. So yes, we are the ones who are partly to blame for the leaders we have.
And we feel it is very much bad for this country to lose one of its property to a foreign land. Why? Because we are not having the right leaders. What if we were told the right person to elect during the election of 2017? I think we could not have elected those who were there.
Kwa hawa wenyekiti wenye wako kwa saa hizi hatuwa deserve, kwa sababu waliingia kwenye kiti, tuliwachagua kwa roho safi, lakini saa uchumi imekuwa mbaya, kila kitu imekuwa mbaya, hakuna kitu yote yenye walituambia yenye inafanyika kwa saa hii.
For now, I think we don't have good political leaders. Why am I saying this? Tunapata wale wafisadi ndio wanachaguliwa.
Yes, we deserve the leaders we have, or the leaders we get, because we go on the ballot out of our own violations. Nobody has ever held a gun on anybody's head to go to the ballot. And it is us who take handouts from these politicians. And then we value politicians on the amount of handouts they give. So if my brother is an MP and he does not give handouts, I will not vote for him, because what has he brought to us?
And our debaters for tonight are: on the affirmative side of the debate, we have Mark Bichachi, a communication strategist. On the negative side of the motion, we have Wanjiro Gikonyo, National Coordinator, the Institute for Social Accountability.
Mark, Wanjiro, welcome to this debate session. Mark, you're arguing on the affirmative side. Wanjiro, you stand in opposition to this motion. We start with your opening statements. You will each have 1 minute for your opening statement. That will be followed by your main presentation. You have 4 to 7 minutes to make your presentation. Thereafter, we'll have rebuttals, your opportunity to rebut against your opponent's arguments. Now, as part of the format of these debates, we have a panel of jurors, 3 jury members who will be listening and evaluating on your arguments. Prior to the start of these debates, the jurors have been polled on the motion, and 3 out of the jury members are against this motion. They stand on the no side of this motion. Wanjiro, you start off with a head start. So Mark, you have a lot of work to do in this debate. At the end of the debate, the jury members will be polled yet again to ascertain whether either of you, especially Mark, has been able to sway them to his side of this motion. Now, we are also polling this debate on our social media pages, so please feel free to let us know, viewers, where you stand on this motion. To start us off, Mark, your opening statement, 1 minute.
I am here to make the very simple case that Aristotle, Nietzsche, and Noam Chomsky most recently have been debating about. Do the people in a representative democracy get the leaders they deserve? Simply because they vote, they participate, and they choose, I affirm that they do. get the leaders they deserve. If you are a joke and the joker is your leader, you are well represented.
All right. Thank you. Wanjiru, your opening statement, 1 minute.
Thank you very much. I may not be as eloquent as Mark, but I would want to say that there is a paradox between an individual's decision to vote and the many factors that inform voting decisions. And in Kenya, the extent to which the environment, the structures and systems are not transparent, accountable and credible have undermined the ability of citizens to get the leaders they deserve. In Kenya, the drivers of democracy and governance remain contested. The electoral system lacks sufficient independence and credibility. Therefore, voters' decisions reflect the contradictions and paradoxes in our evolving democracy and not the wishes of the people. Thank you.
All right. Thank you both for your opening statement. That sets the stage for the main presentation. We circle back to you, Mark. Your main presentation, please.
To start off my argument, I must remind everybody to keep this item of thought in mind. Number one is that whenever you add a number of people to any activity, the collective intelligence of that enterprise reduces. The Englishman said, too many cooks spoil the broth. Now, by definition, then, the fact that democracy is an additive process, it means that the process of electing people by many people must result in a less intelligent result. Indeed, there was a thought experiment held many years ago, and the thought experiment was this. In a town that was to choose a mayor, and there were two candidates. One was a dentist, the other one was a candy salesman. The candy salesman gave out free candy, and the dentist gave out free dental care. I beg you to imagine who won the election. I will tell you, the sweet is sweet to the mouth, and it is good for the voter. The voter will always choose the sweet. The dentist will be there like a grave digger when the tooth is about to be buried. That is the reality. We do not approach politics with a modicum of intelligence. We approach politics with feelings and emotions. And I will tell you, if you've ever been in an emotional state, your intelligence is significantly reduced. Therefore, the process of choosing a leader is an emotional decision. It is not a rational one. If it was a rational decision, I bear witness that then Hitler would never have been the leader of the Third Reich, neither would Donald Trump have been the leader of the most powerful country in the world. But because the human being is affiliated and has an affinity for who? For the person who espouses the desires I have within myself. The person who answers the question, what would I do if I had power, is the person I choose. And therefore Aristotle asked this question, who should be allowed to vote? Because if you go to the United States, when the white man and the white man alone was allowed to vote, then I assure you there were white men in Congress, white men in Senate, white men in the presidency, and the decisions were pro-white people. In the 1930s, when there was a recession, the people who benefited the most were white people living in white neighborhoods. Why? Because their representatives were white. You cannot choose a leader who does not represent your wills and ambitions. There was a time in the history of humanity where the leaders chosen were slave owners. Slavery continued. Why? Because when I choose the person I am choosing, I choose the person who reflects my emotional intelligence, the person who reflects my desires, whims, dreams, and ambitions. And if I was to take it further, the person who also reflects my fears. Therefore, if you were to consider politics, we must ask ourselves, if we argue that our politicians do not represent who we are, is there a special school for politicians? Do they have a different set of parents than we do? Are they born in different hospitals than we were? The answer is no. There is no school for politicians. Instead, our politicians are born, bred, brought up in the same families, in the same setup as we. They went to the same schools. They went through the same education system. They had the same parents. The difference between a politician and you and I is that he has the power and the ability and the wherewithal to do what we all desire. If you think I am wrong, let me give you evidence. If you think it is wrong for politicians to drive on the wrong side of the road and blaring sirens so that they can get to their meetings faster, then tell me what is the difference between that politician and the very average Kenyan who chooses to overlap because he considers his meeting more important. If you think a politician to be a thief, then tell me what happens to the Kenyan who sees a trailer overturned on the road and runs to this trailer to steal from those less advantaged from them. Where do they come from? Our politicians come from our society. We have bred them. If you live in a sack full of rotten potatoes, if you close your eyes and pick one, you will pick a rotten potato. So what am I saying? That it is the desire of the human being to see a reflection of themselves in the leadership that they choose. In that leadership, what do we see? We see someone who sees an opportunity to overlap and takes it. We see someone who sees a sack of potatoes on the road and steals it. That's what we see. So power in Kenya, yes, is conflated with many issues that we can argue affect the decisions of the voter. But at the end of the day, when you see that voter dance for that politician, clap for that politician, and say, I want to be just like you, that Kenyan is being most honest. So there is no politician on the face of this earth who was born in Mars and bred in Venus. They come from these same streets. The same streets where I will step on your foot and not apologize. The same streets where it's written, usikojoe hapa, and that's exactly where you stand. If that person is willing to desecrate a wall when he was a small, insignificant Kenyan, give him a bit of power, then I'll tell you for free, the whole country is his wall.
Thank you, Mark. Mark arguing for the affirmative side of this motion. We get the political leaders we deserve. Strong, passionate argument, but Wanjiru is unmoved. Wanjiru, your main presentation, please.
Thank you very much, and I beg to differ with Mark on almost all the points, because I believe credible elections and electoral systems will give us credible results. So the extent to which our electoral system is not functioning as it ought, because our political coalitions and partners ought to be role models for good governance and democracy. But when we look at the conduct of our political parties, this is not the case. And Jogu and Wekesa have written on this, saying that instead of having political parties of good governance and accountability, we have political parties run by ethnic political barons who are driven by short-term goals, preoccupied with the politics of distribution so that they can feed their stomach, popularly called the tumbocracy. And they are marked, our political parties are marked by regressive, exclusionary, parochial, and in fact fascist interests. So Anyang' Nyong'o and Kivutha writing talked about the inability of our political parties to deliver just electoral results, much less represent the will of the people because of the interests of the owners of the political parties. Another reason I disagree with this motion is because the electoral management system needs to enable citizens to express their will. Has our electoral system truly stood the test of time? Kriegler told us that the conduct of the electoral process in 2007 was hampered by the electoral environment, which was polluted especially by the political parties and the media. So I ask, have we managed to cure the ills that brought us to the electoral violence of 2007? When you look at successive reports in 2013 and again in 2017, and when you look at the decisions that the courts were forced to make after the elections, you can see that whereas we have made some progress, there are still material deficiencies in our elections. In 2013, AFRICOG published that the elections were materially defective. and compromised by electoral violence. And this remains a feature of life that undermines our electoral integrity. In fact, Africa went on to say, the IEBC has been unable to demonstrate its independence, giving rise to the perception of a commission under the thumb of the executive. The Carter Center in 2017 also lamented the lack of independence and talked about the role of violence, harsh attacks by political leaders on the judiciary as undermining the independence and rule of law required for a fair democratic process. The EU, which is one of the more conservative observer groups, also lamented the fact, talking about deep-rooted structural issues of exclusion which undermine our elections. So my core argument is saying that these factors continue to undermine the ability of Kenyans to express themselves fully through the vote. We are then told by Adams Olo and George Omondi that voters' decisions are driven by self-interest. Indeed, they are. Individual aspirations as well, and relationships of trust, and that all these factors come together to influence how one votes. They then remind us that the extent to which land and property concerns have not been resolved in this country. Ethnic identity and proximity is equated with proximity to power and resources, and the extent to which security and safety concerns have not been resolved. And there are other overriding issues such as political propaganda, technology, fake news, and information bubbles. The extent to which these continue to play, this undermines the ability of the voter to vote effectively because our democratic system is broken. In fact, I'll quote them, the violent struggle over scarce resources and power against a backdrop of institutional failure has contributed to the consolidation of ethnic identity for survival and sustenance over a democratic culture. I'll end by saying that in Kenya, we are facing a long drawn-out democratic transition where the interests of the political elite continue to resist the full and effective implementation of the Constitution. And Wanyande, writing in 2013, tells us patrimonial interests still dominate political leadership. Indeed, patrimony has come to dominate all aspects of civic life. So my argument is, because our electoral system is not functioning optimally, and because these patrimonial interests have spilled into our everyday life, whereby if I want to get my child into school, I may have to bribe. If I want to get treatment into a hospital, I may need to get some, if I want to get medicine, I need to know somebody. Our culture of governance is undermined by patrimonial interests, and this is part of the continuing democratic struggle. We need to diagnose our problem correctly so that we can apply the correct remedies and, in fact, not blame the victim, who is the voter, and instead deal with the political culture that we need to change as part of our continuing transformation. Thank you very much.
Right. Mark, your opportunity to rebut on Wanjiru's strong arguments there.
I am tickled by the idea that the person who receives a bribe is more guilty than the briber. That is not the case. If I was to take my 500 shillings and give it to a police officer and we are taken to a court of law, the giver and the receiver are equally guilty, and therefore we cannot argue that because the Kenyan is a receiver of political campaign money and therefore the political process has been undermined by the leader who gives you 500 shillings to go to a rally, is saying that the person who receives these funds is innocent. No, I beg no, he is guilty. Guilty as sin, I dare say. Why? Because if you're going to argue that our elections are not credible, then who is it that does these elections if it is not a Kenyan? The chair of IBC is a Kenyan. The person who's a returning officer is a Kenyan. The person who votes twice is a Kenyan. The person who receives those votes is a Kenyan. So we cannot say that the Kenyan is somehow innocent of the process they willingly put themselves through. But even if we were to argue that somehow our electoral systems have defrauded Kenyans of choosing the leaders they wanted, What is the difference between number 1 and number 2? If indeed our elections are so rigged as to ensure that there is some sort of miscarriage of justice, then the difference between number 1 and number 2 should be like day and night. That we had St. Paul coming in number 2 and Lucifer himself was number 1 because he stole the election. But you cannot tell me that choosing between Lucifer 1 and Lucifer 2 with the 200,000 votes difference is robbing the people of their choice. It is not the politician. It is the Kenyan. It is the Kenyan who picks up a stone and throws it at the other Kenyan. When the politician takes advantage of this emotional heightened state, it is because those emotions exist within us. It is because we sat in the village and we were told, don't you marry from that tribe, don't you dare. And those thoughts, those imaginations that we learned from our homes, not from politicians, are the ones that reflect in our electoral violence. Finally, I want to agree with my worthy opponent because she said Kenya is an ethnic identity, ethno-majoritarian democracy. The truth is, you've just made my point. Why? Because if I wanted to vote for Aluya I am, and Aluya is in office, doesn't that Luya respect and reflect my desires that I've gotten the leader I deserve? For I wanted Aluya. So you cannot vote and say that you're voting according to ethnicity. You get Aluya, Kamba, Kikuyu, and then complain you're not represented. If your qualification was his last name and his last name meets your requirements, you are adequately represented.
Right. Thank you, Mark. Wanjiru, your rebuttal, please.
Thank you so much. I'll start on the point where my worthy opponent talks about the lack of intelligence of our people, that foolish people make foolish choices and they deserve each other. And I say that this displays a lack of it displays a mindset that doesn't believe in the agency of the people. And this is something we are seeing in government very much. A government that looks at people as unable to determine their own outcome. Looks at people as dependent, perpetually dependent. This denies the self-governance and the agency of the people. And I want to put it to you, it's the systems that deprive people of their power of agency, that make them dependent. In 1992, leaders of the African continent met together after the collapse of the economic system and countries going into debt. And their one argument is that they said, we have gone about development the wrong way because we have excluded the people. And when you exclude the people, you fail to tap their strengths and you fail to build them as active and productive citizens. So I want to say a bad system will undermine the citizen and the civic culture. And I want to put it in a different way. We have seen good examples of leadership, and we continue to see good examples of leadership with these very citizens. And when you look at the factors that make good governance, you will see strong civic organization at the local level, like in Makueni. You will also see good leaders putting themselves forward. So indeed, citizens want good leaders. And part of another indication of this is the high turnover that we see, whereby we see around elections, citizens are attempting to vote out their leaders, but because of this faulty system, they are not able to do so. So I do not agree that citizens lack the intelligence to pick good leaders. They pick good leaders in their chamas and in their local groups all the time, but the system denies them that right. The Kenyan is not innocent. I'll repeat again what this argument around ethnic identity and around patrimonial rule. Patrimonial rule is about the use of politics to acquire wealth. And Kenya has been entrapped in an interest of the oligarchy. And Adams Olo writes, the oligarchy has consolidated itself on the backbone of ethnic identity. So it's using our genuine ethnic identities, which are to be celebrated. And they are something great because they show the diversity of the country. But our political leaders have manipulated this for their own economic interest. Another point that I wish to rebut on the strongest term possible is who fights. That citizens, that Kenyans are violent people with a propensity to fight at the least provocation. I disagree. I want to say that that our political leaders are on record as inciting violence. And in fact, violence is a tool, a currency in our electoral process. And it started as far back, you could say it even goes back to the colonial times, because that was the model that we picked from our colonizers. But in modern democratic governance of Kenya, you look no further than the Moi regime. The Moi regime perfected the art of the use of violence to displace people, the art of the use of violence to make people afraid so that they don't vote, to make sure that the leaders that are aligned to the party are the ones that win the day. And unfortunately, this culture continues today, and you have seen it as recently as the by-elections that we have had around the 2022 elections. Political leaders are also on record admitting you need to have a jeshi to make it through our politics. So I want to say that it is not the Kenyans who are violent, but our political process and our political leaders. And unless we deal with this, we will continue to suffer poor electoral leaders, because good electoral leaders will not put themselves up for elective positions for fear of the violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The sweet is sweet to the mouth. You cannot choose leaders a leader who does not represent you. Mark Bichachi arguing for this motion, we get the political leaders we deserve. There's inability of political parties to deliver just results. Our systems deprive people of the power of agency. According to Wanjiru Gikonyo, arguing against this motion. We are now at the halfway point of this debate. In the second half, we largely have questions and answers, starting with cross-examination between the two debaters. We take a short break now. Feel free to engage with us on all our KTN Home social media platforms, including the hashtag @KTNWeDebate. We'll be right back.
In the first half of the debate,
I will tell you, the sweet is sweet to the mouth and it is good for the voter.
We need to diagnose our problem correctly so that we can apply the correct remedies.
I affirm that they do get the leaders they deserve.
We have gone about development the wrong way because we have excluded the people.
And now, for the second half of the debate.
Welcome back to the debate. A quick reminder for you to engage with us on this debate on our KTN Home social media pages. We start off this second half with cross-examinations between the two debaters. This is your opportunity to weaken or even tear down on your opponent's arguments. You have 2 questions maximum to ask your opponent.
Thank you so much, Joe. So my first question, because you argue that the intelligence of the people and the emotions of the people make them, means that you cannot entrust democracy to them. That seems to be the thrust of your argument. Do you think that the Constitution and democratic theory has erred in bestowing sovereignty on the people? Are you arguing that people do not and cannot exercise their sovereignty, can't be trusted to? And the second, do you agree with the school of thought that says that Kenya's electoral system is unable to represent the plurality of interests of the different ethnic groups in this country, that the winner-takes-all system creates too many losers for this system to be fair and representative of the people? Do you agree with that argument? Those are my 2 questions. Thank you.
Let me start here. From the beginning of the experiment called democracy, Aristotle asked the question of who gets to vote. And indeed, that same question is asked by our constitution. There is a reason why we do not allow people under the age of 18 to vote. Why? Because we're making a basic assumption that there is some form of maturity present in someone who's above 18 years old. However, my argument is not that people should be robbed of the agency to vote. No, no, no. My argument is this, that when people exercise their will to vote, and the person that comes out is a Donald Trump, then that is the will of the people. You see, what happens is this, and let's be very honest to the people. Donald Trump rose to office because there are people who agree with him. He represents them. He represents redneck Bible Belt America. And those are people, you can see it in every statement he makes. So we cannot say that because there is a flaw in the system, it does not reflect upon the people. Let me finish. I will
does
finish.
The winner take all represent? Is it the suitable system
but
for
you
Kenya?
See, I am
haven't answered
I am
that
not
question.
answering
it's
that
not
question
working for America.
because it's not the debate I'm having. Because whether it's winner take it all, winner take some, either the some or the all, the person who's been chosen has been chosen by a majority of people who believe and think that what he does and what he represents me, and therefore you get the leader you deserve. So the issue here is not about a Ferrari presidency. The issue indeed is not about the IEBC, because if we were arguing and saying that today we had a totally moral and astute person in office, okay, let me finish.
Maybe Mark, let's get
the
back.
people voted for
Please
him
answer,
and he failed. We would
please
have an
answer
issue.
the sovereignty question.
Yes.
And please answer the winner takes all question.
The sovereignty of the people is in this. If the people are clever enough to choose a good leader, then they're well represented. If the people are foolish enough to vote a foolish leader, then they're well represented. Why? Because that choice is prima facie. It is there. It is evident.
So, Mark, whatever the system,
yes,
the people get the leaders they deserve.
For as long as it is a democratic process. If it is a monarchy, it's a different story.
What if it's a faulty democratic? What if it's a quasi? What if it's not a very imperfect process?
Wanjiru, have we put in your 2 questions?
I've put in my 2.
Do you feel he's answered?
No.
Of course you would not.
Mark, your 2 questions to Wanjiru.
My first question is this. That number one, your argument seems to be premised on the idea that the Kenyan electoral system is flawed. Are you telling me then, in whichever jurisdiction you imagine, that if their electoral system is unflawed, let's say the UK, for example, that Boris Johnson does not represent the people of the United Kingdom?
Right. I think, I was of the mind that we're talking about the Kenyan electoral process, but fair enough, we can do a comparative. In Kenya, my argument is that Kenyans are not able to exercise their democratic voting right.
I understand.
Yes,
Let's talk about the global idea of democracy representing the will of the people.
Right. Democracy is an imperfect system. It's not a perfect system, first of all. And it's a way of democracy is also a negotiation between interests, because when in a country there are different groups with different interests and there are limited resources, there has to be a mechanism of negotiating. There are different types of democracy and democratic systems. You've got the proportional representation, you've got the mixed member representation, you've got the full parliamentary system, you've got the full presidential system. So, to answer your question in a very simple way isn't possible. The argument I'm making is that societies that have different interests, different ethnic and interests, might be better represented by a system that is not as adversarial and competitive as Kenyans is. Further to that, to answer your question more directly, yes, we see better electoral results and more electoral accountability when the system works. So we might think that Boris Yeltsin, his hairstyle notwithstanding, is a bit of a comedic character. Yes, he represents the will of the people who wanted to move out of the EU into going back into UK standing on its own. He represents that constituency. But also remember, much as half the country does not support him, and much as he's a little bit of a very colorful character, he's still very accountable. He's been raked through the coals over the parties he held during COVID.
So,
now that is an electoral system that works better.
You agree that, number one, the democracy in the UK, in the leadership of Boris Johnson, reflects the will of the people?
Well, it reflects the will of part
right.
of the people. To complete, my point is, yes, they voted him, but they also have mechanisms
I need to get to my
hold
second
him
question
accountable.
before it is over.
Yes. And in the Kenyan context, yeah, we can use the examples globally, but in the Kenyan context, do we get the leaders we deserve?
No, because our system doesn't work properly, and we do not have mechanisms to hold our president and even our governors accountable in between. We can't even recall our members of parliament. So once they are in, they are in.
You're talking about a country that has impeached a number of governors, so there is a system to that effect.
That's a political system. It is not a system that's available to the public.
It is a
constitutional. We are talking
yes,
about
and the constitution
do
belongs
the
to the
people
public.
Get the
it's okay.
Makueni tried to impeach the point you're making. Makueni tried to impeach Kivutha Kibwana. Why? Because the County Assembly wanted allowances. They were blackmailing him. They did not want to impeach him because he was a bad governor. They wanted to impeach him for their greed. So the point I'm saying, yes, we have an impeachment process, but do the citizens have a safeguard of their vote? At present, they do not.
Well, that remains to be seen. My second question is, since you argue that our politicians do not represent the people, where is this special place that politicians go to that is not Kenyan society, that trains them in the very duplicitous ability to come from a society to which you do not represent? You're almost arguing as if that when you pick someone immediately to go to parliament, there is some sort of initiation they go to where they immediately disjoint themselves from the societies from which they came. And so what happens to a politician such that he does not represent the people?
First of all, I don't think I spoke in such black and white terms that politicians don't represent the people. What I have said is that people are not able to express their will because of flaws in our political system. And I also went on to say there are some good leaders who are accountable to their people despite these weaknesses. And I gave an example of Kivutha
Kibwana. Those leaders represent the people.
And I gave an example of Kivutha Kibwana. Now back to your question.
Yes.
What happens to these political leaders? I think bad systems corrupt even good people. That's the only way you can explain how in 2013, we had a balanced budget. We had an economy that was growing. We elected in leaders who went ahead to approve development projects that have destroyed the economy of this country. Even though they kept getting advisories from the World Bank, from civil society, even from the central bank. You are over-borrowing. You are borrowing imprudently. And they were borrowing for budgeted corruption. How did our distinguished, educated members of parliament approve these borrowings? It's because bad systems corrupt even good people.
Thank you, Wanjiru. We now cross over to this side of the floor for an opportunity for our panel of jurors to ask questions. We have a youthful panel of jury members. We will start with juror number 1 at the far end. Your 2 questions, please indicate the person to whom your question is directed at.
All right. My first question is to Mark, and thank you, debaters, for the great conversations that we've had. The Kenyan system is a social contract where the people have signed a deal with those who are governing them to give over power to them to rule on their behalf, to the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive branch of government. These guys are the guardrails of this democracy. But where these systems put in place fail to then act, for instance, when identity cards are not given to all people, when voter registration is done in a way to favor certain people, when development is tokenistic in nature, and when majority of our population cannot read and write because we do not invest in the education system well. And when we have institutions like the EACC, the IBC, that are supposed to be the sieve for the leaders that the people eventually get to vote for, that then allow anybody and put the ladder for leadership so low that anyone can jump over it, the people are then left with leaders who they would not necessarily have voted for. But because there's a system in place, because of the social contract that we have signed, this is what we have. Don't you think then that in that situation, it is that system that has set up the people for failure to begin with because of the nature of the social contract? 210, you quoted Adam Zolo and Omondi very well on violence. The Constitution begins with "we the people," the preamble. And whereas you have, in 2007, the people felt that there was a leader that they wanted, that they did not get. And they went, we had violence that ended. In 2017, the people felt that there was a leader they wanted, and there was a lot of violence that ended at some point. When a repeat election was called, a majority of the people did not go into that election. So when we have "we the people" in the preamble, but then we the people refuse to participate or refuse to follow through in their actions to the very end, can we then not just blame the system, but also blame the people? Because whereas these tools have given them the power to do something, and the people have demonstrated that when they do something, the system reacts, but because they fail to follow through, they then subject themselves to the system. Can we blame the people for their lack of follow-through on their actions?
All right, Mark, you will take your question first.
I like that question. It is a very well thought out question in terms of ID cards, voter registration, some form of bias, it would seem, in how the system implements voter registrations and issues like that. Now, the argument there is a moralistic argument, that if the system is immoral and acts selfishly, then has it disenfranchised the people? My argument is not an action argument. My argument is a cause argument. What is the cause of a system that would act in such a manner? The cause of a system that would act in such a manner is the system where it comes from a culture that a parent whose child is sitting KCPE would be willing to avoid the child sitting KCPE, get a stranger to sit for that exam so that the child can pass. When you get that child and that parent to any system, I assure you, they will use it, they will manipulate it. And therefore, my argument is, for the purposes of this conversation, that when you see the evidence of a flawed system, it comes because the people we chose ab initio were also flawed people. The issue is this, that if you are to select between rotten apples, your juice will definitely be rotten. So you cannot say that the juice is flawed in and of itself. We must ask, what is the source of this malaise in our society? And I'm saying, even when you go to a government office and a person refuses to serve you, they learned that behavior from a culture that is selfish. They learned that behavior when they were in a matatu and someone overlapped. They learned that behavior when a father died and the uncle stole your inheritance. That is the society we have bred, and we cannot remove society from the results of its own actions.
All right, thank you, Mark. Wanjiru, your response to Jim's second question?
I think this reinforces the point I was making, whereby if citizens don't have confidence in a system, they are unlikely to spend time on that system. And one of the side, culture is a funny thing, because culture is bred by practice, and practice also then breeds the culture. So one of the side effects of poor governance or failure of systems is apathy. And if you look at the 2022 elections, you'll see there's also apathy. In fact, the number of youth who registered for the 2022 has fallen compared to 2017. Why did youth not come out to vote? Because they are losing confidence in the political system and in their political leaders. You can also see there's a high number of undecided. There were 30% before the naming of the deputy deputy presidents. I think now it's maybe at around 20%. So a few, after seeing how the political leaders chose their DPs, decided what side they are going on. But still a very high number of undecided. This means that Kenyans are very unhappy because there was a promise of the Constitution that has really been betrayed. It's been betrayed because our political leaders do not uphold the law. There's been a lack of rule of law, as you said, a lot of things, whether it's tokenism, failure to comply, failure to abide by court rulings, attacks on the judiciary, defunding the judiciary when it votes a certain way. So I want to say that one of the side effects, and we found this in a development perspective, we were doing work in Nairobi County and we found that when public participation started under devolved government, people were very excited and showed up. But when the county didn't implement, citizens then stopped attending, and in some cases also turned violent when the officers came up. So apathy is also bred by this failure of institution.
Okay. We move to juror number 2. Sarah, your one question to either of the debaters.
So the question goes to Mark. Mark, the citizen is as guilty as charged. You said, and you were mentioning a lot about Hitler and Trump, yeah? So you said you cannot get a leader you did not choose. The leader that I choose reflects my desires. How so? When the system in place already gives a particular percentage, let's say 50 plus 1, so, and we have 49% who are also voting. So where is the power of the 49%? Did they get the leader they deserve? How do they live in that system?
Well, you know what is interesting, and I like that question because it is a question of what democracy is. One of the definitions I like about democracy is the subjugation of the minority by the majority. You know, the majority have their say, their way, and the minority have their say. So that is an inherent problem with democracy, that those who lose an election will always not enjoy the fruits of what the power would have done for them. But the question then remains, does this 49%, does it also respond to what the people wanted? So let me give you an example. In this country, the biggest tribe is the Kikuyu. When they vote a certain way, and they have done so 3 times in our history, we have a Kikuyu president, okay? Now, does that mean that the Luyas, for example, who've never had a president, are happy? No. Why? Because every time they look at the top office, they do not see one of their own. So does that lack of a certain leader who you chose also reflect your reality? Yes, it does. Because it so happens that in terms of numbers, Luyas are less than Kikuyus. So that is also a reflection of the state of how people are. So basically, the Ogiek, for example, in this tribalistic voting, will an Ogiek in the next 10 years be able to lead? No. But that is also a reflection of the reality and the triumphs and misfortunes of being Ogiek. So in terms of, does it represent what the people are and how they manifest in our country and how they vote? Yes, because if the people then chose outside
Mark, your argument assumes that all the Kikuyus, all the Luyas, all the Ogieks are inclined to vote for one of their own, which is not necessarily
it assumes that the majority of Luyas and Kikuyus have voted for one of their own. And that assumption is underscored in every results of every election.
Mark, you've also made the case that winner takes all does not work for Kenya, because the only situation where you have that problem is the winner takes all, or the presidential system, not in the parliamentary system, not in the mixed member proportional representation. So back to the point, apart from poor governance and apart from the violation by the oligarchic interest, patrimonial interest around our election, we also have a flawed electoral system that is disenfranchising a part of the country, raising the stakes too high.
But at the end of the day, that reflection even if it was a mixed member representation system, that would reflect how people wanted to vote. So for example, in Kenya, if we had and made sure that we had a mixed member system where you vote for a political party and you get a certain number of seats, that would be evidence positive that if you vote for a certain candidate, a certain party, and only 3% voted for that party, only 3% would be in parliament. That's representing the will of the people.
Okay. Juror number 3, Salmon, your question to Wanjiru, I presume.
Thank you. I think both the debaters have brought out some very good points. My question goes to Wanjiru. You have really absorbed the citizenry from their role in this whole democratic system. Because the citizenry occupies the positions in the electoral commission, they occupy the positions in the justice system, and they also are the voters, and they also become the leaders. So the question is, at what point do these citizens rise and take on patriotism and say that us as citizens, we have a role to make our own political party that we believe in. We have a role to make sure that we are independent as IEBC, and because we are independent, we are going to make independent decisions despite any kind of persuasions. So at what point do these citizens, or at what point are the backstop with these citizens, who the Constitution has given the power?
Citizens are part of the problem, but the case I'm making is that it is not, citizens do not get the leaders they deserve because the system is broken. What do we fix? We also have to fix what is being called the national ethos. So no, I don't absolve the citizen. There is corruption in our culture. It's become endemic, unfortunately, because our poor system is creating this culture. However, it undermines the ability of citizens to exercise their agency. Back to the point you're making, at what point do citizens stop engaging as citizens and engage as leaders? The BBI ruling of the Supreme Court actually pronounced itself on this. When the president sought to exercise his powers as a citizen to raise a citizen petition, and he was told no. When you're sitting in your office, you are the president and you have those instruments of power at your hands. You are not, much as he's a citizen of Kenya, when he sits in that office, he is not an ordinary citizen. So there are certain rights that he cannot access, such as the right of citizen petition. And this applies to our political leaders as well. And what the BBI ruling told us is that there is a place for citizens. And there is a place for our political leaders. And our political leaders are then bound by the rules of Chapter 6, Article 232 on the conduct in office. And they are bound by that. But unfortunately, they've been violating that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to the jurors for your questions. That brings us to the end of this question and answer phase of this debate. We're now at the tail end of the debate. And this is your opportunity to really crystallize and bring home your key arguments with your closing statement. We start with you, Mark. You have 1 minute closing statement.
As always, I like to situate my debates and my points on a global scale. If you want to know, on a very basic level, that democracy produces the leaders the people want, if you go to India, you'll seldom find a black prime minister. Why? Because they want an Indian for Indians. If you come to Africa, who do we choose? We choose people who look like us, talk like us, walk like us. Why? Because it's called a representative democracy. Yes, there are flaws in the system, but those flaws are not significant enough to rob the Kenyan that now an Indian can fly into this country and rig elections and actually be president. That is impossible. The truth of the matter is the flaws constituted within our democratic framework have not robbed the people significantly enough that they can say they did not show up en masse to vote for Uhuru Kenyatta. They cannot say they did not show up en masse to vote for Raila Odinga in 2017. The truth is this, that the people in this country and indeed across the world where democracy is practiced have the opportunity to choose. And every time, every single time, the people have chosen the people who look like them, think like them, say the things they want to be said, whether they are secret or true. And when those politicians say what you want to hear, sing the songs that you want sung, dance the dances you want danced, you will vote for them. Why? Because you are voting for yourself, your ideas, your ideals. Do not be lied to. Unless the Kenyan voter decides to take up residence in politics and say, I am going to change myself, and then I am going to change the leader I am choosing, system or no, Kenya will not change.
Wanjiru, your closing statement, 1 minute.
Thank you very much. I wish to argue that the electoral process doesn't begin on voting day. It begins on the series of processes that build up to that day, including civic education of the people, including voter registration, including the acquisition of the voting kits, including the voters register, and it continues beyond elections day with the vote counting, the accountability of those leaders when they go into the office, your ability to recall or impeach them and to hold them accountable. And so the argument that I make is that our electoral system is broken and it is failing the people of Kenya. And it has been imbued by a regressive culture and an exclusionary approach where the majority are not able to access power, and that we need to change that system so that the citizen of Kenya can exercise their agency fully in the manner that they ought. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's it for the debate. A big thank you to our two debaters for a strong and passionate debate on both ends. Key insights and takeouts. But the big question, has either of you done enough to sway the jury to your side of this debate, especially you, Mark?
At the beginning of the debate, no juror was in support of the motion. All the jurors were against the motion. Have the debaters managed to win over the jurors with their arguments? Let's find out.
Well, the jury's verdict is in, and at the end of this debate on the motion, let it be resolved, we get the political leaders we deserve. The juror's position is as follows. One of the three jury members is in support of this motion. Two are against the motion. So clearly the tide has moved slightly to the affirmative side, but much more needed to be done, Mark, on your end. Well, that's the verdict of this jury. Do you agree with it? We welcome your feedback and comments on this debate. Please hit us up on our social media handles appearing on your screen right now. Well, that's it for this edition of We Debate. Thank you once again to our two debaters. Members of the jury, thank you. Our location host, the Norfolk Hotel, the KTN team behind this production, and most especially you, the viewer, for tuning in and participating in this conversation. I am Joe Munene, and we'll see you at the next debate.